Sana. She's the Executive Director of the Center for Migrant Advocacy, Philippines. That's an independent policy group that promotes the rights of Filipinos overseas. It's another tragic story that we've heard from Marga Ortigas there. Ms. Sana, what can be done to better protect domestic workers? I mean, we hear this kind of story over and over again.
Hello?
Hello, Ms. Sana, can you hear me?
I cannot... Yeah, but not very clearly.
Let me repeat my
the
question. Yes, of course. What can be done to better protect Philippine workers overseas so this kind of tragic story doesn't happen again?
Yeah, actually, in terms of measures, you will remember that after the 2006 Lebanon war, the government came up with a set of policy reforms specifically to address better protection for our domestic workers. But unfortunately, as we can see from these continuing cases of violence against domestic workers, policies are not enough. We have to be more proactive, especially on site, and especially even before they leave the country. And I will be specifically referring to information campaign, reaching out to the most remote areas in the country so that people will be made aware that it's not so easy to take the option of migration, especially for our women, especially when they are going to countries that are not really so much aware that they should be extending protection also to migrant workers, specifically to migrant domestic workers.
How much real leverage do Philippine officials have, though, with host country governments like Saudi Arabia?
Leverage. You're talking of leverage. I think, for the record, for the longest time, it's been like almost 4 decades, for the longest time, Saudi Arabia has been the top country destination. And I think by now, even earlier, Saudi Arabia has recognized that the Filipino migrant workers have contributed enormously to the development of the economy. And I think this is something that the government should be able to get a grasp of and put it on the table and remind the Saudi government of this. And I think the pressure should be more on our side, that we should really make the government of Saudi Arabia sit down and do some concrete protective measures for our people in Saudi Arabia. We have the biggest population of migrants in Saudi Arabia, and I think it is enough that we should be able to put our foot down and do a better negotiation for our workers in Saudi Arabia.
And also, for the record, I don't mean to pick out Saudi Arabia. There are cases of abuse right throughout the world. I think there are abusive employers everywhere. Why does it continue to be a problem for the Philippine government and other countries that supply workers overseas? Is there a need for an international framework?
I didn't get the question.
I'm asking if there's a need for a wider international policy framework for host governments and governments that are looking after migrant workers.
Definitely, definitely. The international community should be mobilized, that the protection of migrant workers should not just be a business, particularly or primarily of the sending governments and also of the receiving governments, but the international community, probably under the auspices of the United Nations, should be able to sit down and talk seriously about protection of migrant workers. And maybe at this point, the good news, a little bit of good news, is that in the 99th session of the International Labour Conference in June this year, finally, countries voted to adopt a convention for the protection of domestic workers, and that would include local domestic workers and migrant domestic workers. And we look forward to next year when the ILO will meet again and hopefully to adopt the convention and work for the process of ratification of the member states of the ILO. That is something good. At the United Nations level, we are trying to use also the Global Forum on Migration and Development to put the issue of rights of migrant workers even before we talk about migration and development.
Thank you very much indeed. Live from Manila, Ellen Sana.